Thank you for listening to the Bladder Battle Podcast special series, I See in the Dark. This series dives deep into the perplexing disease, interstitial cystitis. This podcast is intended to bring awareness and create conversation around the illness by providing possible remedies, tips for managing the disease, how you can show support, and so much more. This podcast is not intended to be a medical alternative for physician care, nor to treat, cure, or prevent any illness or disease. Always consult with a physician for professional medical advice. Today we are talking all about one of my favorite forms of exercise, Pilates, and how it can be beneficial for those with interstitial cystitis. So joining me today is physiotherapist, personal trainer, and Pilates instructor, Zoe Mckenzie. So Zoe, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thanks for asking for me to be on.
Absolutely. So I'm very excited about this topic, as you can tell.
Same as my two favorite subjects, bladders and Pilates.
This is perfect. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you and your background and kind of personal story with IC?
Yep. So if you've got about 2 hours, no. So I basically had episodes of bladder problems sort of all through my childhood and growing up, but didn't really think much of it. Got a little bit worse in my teens and just kept thinking, I should get this looked into, like something isn't 100% right with my bladder, but was functioning fine. Would almost get episodes of cystitis, but not ever come back as cystitis. But yeah, dismissed it. I graduated to physio in 2013, moved to Australia and lived and worked out there for several years pretty well. And then I became super sick with and later got diagnosed with lupus. And that's kind of when my bladder problem became something that was just intermittent episodes to kind of a life-changing symptom that just never went away. I woke up from surgery, just desperate to pee, like in full retention, and just never really got better from there.
Aww.
Yeah, I keep all the usual tests, and I did get loads of infections to start with, but then they started coming back saying it wasn't an infection, but I still had the same pain. I had cystoscopies where they ruled out all the scaries like cancer, and all it really showed then was I had inflammation, but no kind of major reason why. Was put under the umbrella of chronic bladder pain, which I think covers so many different conditions and reasons why. And then for me, it was actually urodynamics that kind of provided the bigger answer, and it showed that I was in chronic urinary retention pretty much all the time, and I was unable to empty my bladder due to my urethra. So then I moved on to self-catheterizing, and then that sort of was, lasted that for about a year. Then that started not to work as well for me because of my spasming in my urethra. Then I had a urethral catheter, and now I've got a suprapubic catheter. So yeah, it's been a kind of crazy 4 years, and I definitely took for granted the many years I could pee normally because it's very different now.
Yes, it sounds all too familiar.
Yeah, I actually wrote before I had any bladder problems at university, as part of my physio degree, my dissertation, or people call it their thesis, I think in America, I actually wrote a 10,000 words on the role of the pelvic floor with interstitial cystitis. So not sure if that was a prophecy or not, but I never at that time dreamt I would be dealing with the role of the pelvic floor or with bladder pain and problems. But yes, I am. So whether that was a mistake to do, I don't know.
That is so crazy and ironic, and of course unfortunate.
I know.
You're almost like, did I, will this on myself?
I know.
That's crazy.
And I remember then thinking, it's so confusing how many different names for quite similar problems, and there was such a lack of research back then, kind of in how everything works and how the role of the pelvic floor links to bladder pain. But yeah, I didn't realize I'd be living it myself. But anyway, but yeah, then I got basically diagnosed with, they call it Fowler syndrome, but basically it's urethral dysfunction. And then for me, because that causes retention, I get sort of inflammation in my bladder, as I can't fully empty. But since having the suprapubic, it's generally a lot better, but I still have chronic daily bladder pain and issues, and still issues with infections and things. So still very much ongoing.
As it will be probably lifelong, unfortunately. And yeah, that's quite the story and progression of, how it started off pretty mild and now it's full-fledged.
Yeah, I think they said, because I've got other conditions too. So I've got Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I've also got lupus as well. They say, particularly with EDS, it's quite common for sort of us. They don't fully understand why, as often is the case, but it's like a cliff edge. Like you just kind of get to a certain point, and then your function just drops off. And I know that's been the case for quite a lot of people. And surgery for many people is also like a trigger that the bladder just seems to go, nope, not doing this anymore. So yeah, it's very, very interesting.
The whole thing, it's very frustrating because everybody's in it at a different stage, even though they don't really label IC in stages, although I think they should, because the many people that I speak to, some people have very mild symptoms. Some people are, all the way, they've been dealing with this for 20 years and it has never gotten better. And it's, very life altering and affects their ability to work. So, there's just so many different areas that you can be in. And that's what makes this such an isolating disease, unfortunately. So
yeah,
it's, it's very interesting to kind of hear your background with interstitial cystitis.
When I was working, so before my lupus diagnosis, and I guess everything came to a head and I couldn't really ignore things anymore. I was working as a physio, and I remember I'd get these episodes for weeks where I'd literally be running to and from the toilet, just constantly feeling like I needed to go, but being unable to. But it's interesting then that I never did actually reach out for support or got looked into or anything, yet it was massively impacting my life and my ability to work even then. So it was only until I was actually forced to, because I was no longer able to go to the toilet myself, that I actually did get help. So I think that's the problem, isn't it? Especially if it's episodic or if it's deemed milder than other people's, people won't reach for help or ask for help about it.
Right. And it's a very, private and personal issue. So it's hard to reach out for help, I think. You don't always want to ask when it comes to your bladder and, everything associated with that. Speaking of, your ability to work, I feel like a lot of people that have IC find it really hard to do exercise. So, exercise, work, a lot of different activities. Yeah. So how did you become so passionate about Pilates, where you were, pretty full-fledged with IC? How did that come to be a big part of your life?
Well, it kind of goes back to when I was much younger. So though I sort of say I classed myself as getting chronically ill in 2017. I actually was dealing with a chronic illness for years before that. So I had my Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis when I was sort of 12, 13. So that's a connective tissue disorder. So I had lots of injuries, dislocations, soft tissue injuries, nothing super dramatic, but they just don't really heal very well. And I was actually end up in a wheelchair, unable to walk before they kind of knew what was wrong. And then through intensive physio, I learned how to walk again and built my strength up so I could function with Ehlers-Danlos. And that sort of sparked my passion to be a physio. And then also through my physio rehab personally, I started doing Pilates. But Pilates back then was definitely more just for like yummy mummies or the older population. So I tended to be the youngest in the class by a long way. These days, it's a much cooler thing to do. But yeah, that kind of sparked my that sparked my passion for it then. So as soon as I graduated as a physio, sort of the first course I did post-grad was my Pilates mat work course. And then I later trained in equipment Pilates, such as the Cadillac chair and reformer. And then I worked in Australia and I worked in an amazing practice. It was really integrative in terms of how we did physio and Pilates together. So we very much use Pilates as a tool to rehab our clients, because Pilates is just amazing because it's addressing the dysfunction and fits with the holistic approach of how the body works together and sort of helping that muscle imbalance. And I just always loved helping clients find a way to move at the same time as a way to address the root cause of their pain. So it kind of fitted into my whole ethos about how I liked it. And then I always did Pilates myself, but particularly as I got more sick after my lupus diagnosis and bladder pain obviously became a bigger problem, my options of exercise narrowed a lot. I obviously couldn't run or do kind of high intensity things, or I didn't really swim either. I wasn't well enough to go to places like that or do classes. So for me, Pilates then became my main source of exercise at home, because obviously a lot of it you can do either lying or seated. So you can really lower the impact of the exercise. And so I found a new way to move using what I already knew, but adapting it to having chronic illness and chronic pain.
Yeah, I have another autoimmune disease that I got in 2013. I just took Pilates as a class for a credit in college. I had no idea I was going to fall in love with it. I was pretty sick during one semester and I was taking it and it was helping me, feel better. I was always a very physically active person. So, I was very upset that I couldn't go to the gym and lift weights and do squats and all that, heavy lifting. But I found Pilates to just be such a wonderful exercise. And I got the most toned and just best looking body from it. So I always incorporated it into regular exercise for me. Until, this past November, my IC got really bad and now I'm very limited on exercise. So it's the one thing that I just do every day at home and it's amazing and it's just incredible.
You can just come back to it and
so
definitely.
It's very similar, with my story. And that's why I think it's just such an exciting topic because what I find is a lot of people ask who have IC or any bladder related condition or even any autoimmune condition, how do you exercise? How do you stay fit? And I always say Pilates is one of the most amazing exercises. It was literally founded to help people rehab in hospitals. So it's just an amazing thing. So I think it's pretty incredible that you only, intensified your passion for it throughout the years.
Yes.
Can you kind of go into detail about how it specifically can be beneficial for people that have IC or painful bladder syndrome?
I'm trying to go too deep into anatomy, but I guess a lot of people with IC chronic bladder pain have pelvic floor dysfunction as well. And that's obviously a huge part of it. There's mixed research, whether it's a primary or secondary cause. So whether having just bladder pain on its own causes the effect on your pelvic floor, or is it the fact that your pelvic floor is dysfunctional that's causing the impact on your bladder? So there's a lot of mixed research in that. But either way, it's about Pilates particularly can help massively improve how your pelvic floor functions alongside all your other core muscles as well and helps sort of readdress that whole muscle balance. I tend to think it's a combination of both, like everything works together. So if one thing's not working, that impacts something else. And so addressing your pelvic floor will definitely sort of help improve all your symptoms. Being in chronic pain all the time alters how our body works. So initially pain is used as an alarm telling us something's wrong and the brain reacts to it. But as pain persists, the alarm system becomes really sensitive and it responds to things that don't really need a response and reacts to things that shouldn't react in that same way. So one example is the effect that pain has on our muscles. Our brain can tell our muscles to switch off. So it's an inhibitory effect to stop pain, or sometimes it makes muscles sort of overactivate in order to brace and protect that area. So that's why you get some muscles that are really overused and tight and painful and high tone, and some muscles that are super weak and not being used the way we should. And then plus you've got people, some people with pelvic floor and pelvic pain may end up with weak pelvic floor muscles and struggle to activate them, whereas others who have perhaps more overactive bladder or retention like me may end up with tight, high-toned pelvic floor that struggles to relax. So there's different reasons why your pelvic floor can be affected. Then add in the layer of just the additional stress our bodies go through from procedures or surgeries and things that we've had to go through as well. Plus, perhaps we're just not moving as much as we used to because of the pains limiting what we do in our daily lives. So in total, a whole area around our pelvis and abdomen is affected by pain. And Pilates can help target all these muscles, all the muscles around kind of your abdomen and your pelvis to help balance everything out and help with the activation of those muscles, coordinating our muscles, timing when they contract, to kind of everything to function a lot better. And that's probably why you found it's kind of helpful and it's such a good exercise you can come back to and go back to basics, and then you can kind of build and layer up and do much sort of higher functioning standing work or more bar Pilates type style. So that's why I love it, because it's so adaptable. You can bring it right down to a super low level, as in just from surgery, and do go through the basics, and then right up to kind of much higher level, higher impact stuff.
Absolutely. And I think the most amazing part of it for me, for being someone that has always been very into exercise, it's the small movements that make such an impact. And it almost feels like you're not doing anything, but then you wake up the next day and you're like, wow, I can feel it. And it's not a horrible, achy pain either. Like you just feel better. I don't know how to describe it, but you just feel stronger and more toned, and it's not like you lifted, heavy weights and now your back hurts or things like that. And it really also helps to balance out, some muscles you favor one side of your body more than the other. So it's incredible for creating that balance as well.
Definitely. I sort of talk about, when we talk about our core stability, I talk about the tin can approach. So it's imagine like our trunk is a can of, I don't know, Coca-Cola or something, a tin can. And we need all four sides of our tin can to hold ourselves up. So if you imagine a tin can that's got a dent in, it's not very strong and kind of collapses. So we've got to think of creating those four sides pulling together to hold us upright. So the front of our tin can is our core muscle, our transverse abdominis. The back of our tin can is our spinal muscles like multifidus and erector spinae. The top of the tin can is your diaphragm and the bottom is your pelvic floor. And we need all four sides of those to work together. And like you said, that muscle balance is so important. In particular, our transverse abdominis and our pelvic floor work super closely together. So if you activate one, it sort of triggers the other one to work as well. But also our diaphragm and pelvic floor work so closely. So I'm sure everyone's been told loads, like deep breathing really helps. But it really does, because breathing helps help that pelvic floor fully relax and contract as well. So the diaphragm and pelvic floor literally are like synchronized from the top and bottom together. So knowing how to kind of activate all four sides in the right way is super important. And like you said, you kind of end up feeling like you maybe haven't moved all that much, but suddenly you're aware of all these muscles you didn't really know existed before. And that's what Pilates does. It particularly focuses on all those stabilizing muscles. And we kind of start by training them in isolation first. And that's not because we don't believe that everything works together, because we do. Everything's connected. But when we start training, we need to work with the smaller muscles on their own before adding in the sort of working together movements. And that's because otherwise our big, strong muscles want to take over and do everything. And they're already kind of strong. So you want to work on those stabilizing muscles first, and then we can start to add movements and muscles together as you get stronger.
When I first started doing this, I loved finding those small muscles that had never been, they've been used, but not on a regular basis.
Yeah.
It was such a kind of incredible feeling, like, whoa, I'm using this part of my body I didn't even realize needed to be used. Even like in your ankles, if your ankles aren't strong and there's so many little muscles there, that's just the foundation for everything.
Yeah. The amount of people that go, oh, I don't have a core, or like my core is weak. I'm like, no, you definitely have a core. Or even men, I've had men go, oh, we don't have pelvic floors. I'm like, no, you definitely do. You're just not aware of them. And that's part of the thing, I think, is building your awareness of your body. Anyone with any kind of chronic pain, and I think particularly sort of abdominal and bladder pain, all those pain signals kind of mix everything up and we lose that awareness and connection to our body. So Pilates is a great way to kind of reconnect to yourself and know what's going on in your body and feel movements again. And yeah, I think that's a huge positive benefit of Pilates, because it's very mindful, because you have to kind of concentrate a lot on what you're doing to do it correctly. People often finish the sessions and feel better mentally as well as physically, because you've kind of, you haven't had a chance to think about everything else going on in the world. You've only focused on your body for that session.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely find that when I do a class, I'm just focused on one, improving and being able to do more than last time. And then secondly, just really focusing on how I feel, how my muscles feel, just how my body feels overall. So yeah, it's a very mindful experience. Let's talk a little bit about some of the different exercises. So, you talked about isolating some of those muscles, and especially the smaller muscles that we don't utilize a lot. So when it comes to IC, what are some exercises for Pilates that you would recommend for someone with IC to kind of start with?
So definitely looking at your pelvic floor function. One thing I will say is if you have, depends where you're on the spectrum with IC and how much it's affecting you. But if you haven't sort of seen a physiotherapist, a women's health physio or pelvic floor therapist, it's really useful to go and get an assessment and see how your pelvic floor muscles are functioning first. I think it's up to 30% of people can't correctly contract their pelvic floor. They tend to either push down, which is the opposite effect. So either if you're new to it, or perhaps you've been doing it for some time and not feeling any benefit, it might be that you're not sort of using that muscle in the right way. So it's definitely worth getting another opinion. But yeah, starting to think about your pelvic floor. So thinking of contracting it, I can talk you through it. So if you pop your fingers on your hip bones and then walk your fingers just a fraction down and into the soft, squishy part of your body. And then just inhale, relax everything. So it's really common when we do any kind of pelvic floor contraction, people start to tense up everything in their body. You see people pulling funny faces, holding their breath or squeezing their bum muscles, none of which actually impact how your pelvic floor functions. So trying to find a nice relaxed state before doing this is really important. And then on your next exhale, what you want to imagine is squeezing from your back passage all the way up and forward. So it's kind of squeezing up and forward as if you're sort of tucking your tailbone between your legs and squeezing it through. And underneath your fingers on your pelvis, you should feel like a tiny, tiny sort of twitch or a slight movement. Now, this, through palpating through the front of your stomach, isn't always the most accurate way of feeling your pelvic floor, but you can get some sense of whether it's being switched on or not. You can obviously feel it yourself internally with your fingers, or like I said, go and see a women's health physio if you're not sure how to do it. But with your pelvic floor, practicing holding it and then gently releasing. And when we relax, we want to fully relax it as well. So definitely anyone with overactive bladder, kind of more symptoms, or think they've got a high tone pelvic floor, the relaxation part is just as important as the strengthening part. If you just keep strengthening without fully letting go, you're just kind of feeding into that pain cycle of a hypertonic pelvic floor. So using your breath to fully relax afterwards, let everything, call it drop and flop. As you breathe out, let your stomach drop forward and your pelvic floor flop down. That's a really nice technique to kind of let everything go. So you're doing long holds and relaxing, and then also practicing short and quick holds for the pelvic floor. So quick, contract, relax, contract, relax. And that's to sort of stimulate, if you suddenly were desperate for the toilet, that's what your body would kind of naturally do, is sort of hold on and release. So training those things, that's obviously a static exercise. And then the other thing to practice is your transverse abdominis core muscle contraction. So fingers in the same place, just off your hip bones, down a fraction. And again, inhale, relax everything. And this time as you exhale, you're going to draw your belly button towards your spine. And you just feel like it almost sort of zipping up through your center, or like you're trying to fit some jeans on and you're kind of pulling yourself in to try and do your jeans up. Or you can imagine your hip bones are sort of moving apart from each other, and you kind of feel this almost corset-like sensation sort of wrapping around. And again, you want to feel everything else relaxed. Your other abdominal muscles, like your six-pack abs, your obliques, are relaxed. They're not doing any help. They want to help sometimes, but it's not actually that helpful for them to help you. Glutes relaxed, everything else relaxed. So just this tiny sensation. And again, under your fingers, you should just feel that little tightening. And we only want that one about a 3 or 4 out of 10. So often people try and brace everything, hold their breath and squeeze it super tightly. You want it kind of low level, because it's a stabilizing muscle that we switch on and leave on for a long time. And that's generally the muscle you want to sort of keep switched on throughout all your Pilates exercises. So once you've got those two things sort of turned on, and that can take a while to build up your awareness, especially like if you've had pain. So just starting with that, practicing in all different positions, lying, sitting, standing, walking, standing up, when you're talking, when you're on the toilet, all those sort of things are helpful. Don't do pelvic floor on the toilet though, I should say that. But it's definitely good for your core. And then you can start to sort of add in more movements. So we can then start adding sort of breathing work in as well. So maintaining your breath while sort of keeping that core contraction. So in Pilates, you probably know we'd use our lateral breath versus our diaphragmatic breath. So with the lateral breath, we breathe out into the side of the rib cage. Now this is so we get all the benefits of that deep breathing and using our diaphragm, but without interrupting what's going on through our abdominal muscles. So taking those nice deep breaths into the side of the rib cage, almost feel like you're expanding out to the side. And then as you exhale, you sort of soften back into center. So starting to add in some breaths, and then adding in like some arm work, sort of challenging your pelvic stability, all kind of helps work that core a bit harder. And then it's about kind of reintroducing some movement to the pelvis and particularly the spine, again, for the impact pain has on all that area. So working on your spinal mobilizations through pelvic tilts, where you tilt your pelvis forward and backwards, trying to keep those hip bones facing forward, so they're just rocking forward and back and get that nice range of movement, or going up into bridges, anything to kind of help re-engage that whole area and make the muscles work how they should do again, and sort of work through that pain. And then anything challenging that core stability, adding some leg work in, building up that global strength, kind of just using things that we're trying to dissociate movement. So again, when we have experienced lots of pain, often those pain signals sort of mess up how our muscles contract and when they work together or when they work separately. We want our legs to be able to move independently of each other. Like you said, when we're walking, our legs are doing different things, at different times. So we want to be able to move our legs in a way that means that they're not having to do the same thing at the same time. So lots of kind of leg and arm movements is why it gets very mindful, because suddenly you've got arms and legs floating out in different directions and having to control it all and think of your breath at the same time. So you can see how we sort of start really simply with very sort of static activation exercises, and then gradually start to increase what's moving, what's stable, and building up that kind of strength and stability work.
Yeah. And it's kind of, once you find like that pelvic neutral, it kind of is the foundation for any sort of exercise in the future, because even as I have
definitely
gone into more of like remission and I've been able to restore some of my old workout routines that aren't really related to Pilates, it still helps that foundation for just correct posture and even squatting. Like I'm more mindful of, what my pelvic area is doing. And so I'm not tilting it.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly.
We kind of talk about the five key like principles of Pilates. And I mean, that's kind of what I use for posture as well. So obviously posture is affected by pain and everything like that. So the principles of Pilates literally do carry over to what you said, from everything you do throughout your day to any other exercise. So it's hugely adaptable. That's why, can never say how good Pilates is just for anyone and everyone. I've got my dad doing it now as well.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, I rave about it, and I'm not an instructor or anything, but I mean, definitely would love to do that at some point in my life and in my healing journey.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. One thing I started to do a year ago was reformer Pilates, and that is a lot more difficult. But just to give our audience a little bit of overview about that, what's the difference between mat Pilates and reformer Pilates?
So mat Pilates is unsurprisingly done on the mat, obviously, which is great because you can do it anywhere. When we talk about mat Pilates, we include things like small equipment, such as small Pilates balls, chi balls, hand weights, or like exercise bands. Whereas reformer Pilates is a bigger piece of equipment. It's got like a sliding bed component with attached springs and ropes. And the springs have different resistance levels, so you can adjust the intensity based on the exercise you're doing and your strength. But it's actually a misconception, as you probably know, that the harder the spring you're on is the harder the exercise, because some exercises, the lighter the spring makes it harder to control. Mm-hmm. So it's a really great piece of equipment because you can vary so much. You can work upper body, lower body, full body. You can do things lying, sitting, standing, all different positions. Again, it's interesting you said that reformer is harder than mat. So personally, I actually find mat harder than reformer, because I feel like the mat is just you and your body. You've got nothing else to kind of control your movement. It's all you. Whereas the reformer, you can obviously change and support your body. Obviously, you have got the addition of the springs that can make certain movements particularly harder because you're pushing against more. But for some of the basic foundation Pilates stuff, I often find mats harder. But the principles that we said earlier apply to both. It's all about creating sort of length and space in your body whilst activating the right muscles and doing strength and stability work. So I think particularly like reformer classes can be super fun. Personally, I'd love be life goals to have a reformer in my house
yes.
to play on. I think it keeps things, it can be a little bit monotonous, you on your mat all the time, but having a reformer, you've got a lot of more things to play with, but then equally add in one piece of equipment on your mat, you can change everything up massively. So yeah, I think it depends, personal preference on what you kind of would prefer or think you enjoy.
Definitely. I think for me, it was the reformer was just very intimidating at first. But then once I figured out how to really utilize it and I started going to classes, it kind of all just clicked one day. Just kind of like how mat Pilates did for me one day. I was, thinking about, it's really difficult. It's really hard to control all these muscles. I feel like I'm not doing it right. Overall, it can be kind of intimidating to get into, but once you continue practicing it, your body will start to recognize, okay, this is the position I'm supposed to be in, and it feels better and you feel more comfortable. It'll just click one day. That's kind of how it happened for me.
That's what I kind of say. I said, don't get bogged down too much by what it feels like all these rules, but you're trying to think about 10 billion things at once, and people holding their breath, trying to catch up on the breathing cues, because I'm like, the breathing will come, because actually the breathing is very intuitive. When it says like inhale now, exhale now, people are like, oh, I'm trying to catch up. And it's not about that. It's just about once you actually find your sort of, rhythm with it all, the breathing helps you, as I'm sure you probably know now. So I tell people not to worry too much, listen to yourself, listen to your body, listen to the instructor, so you're not going to hurt yourself, but don't worry too much, focus on the movement, and the rest will kind of fall into place. The more you do it, and the more it becomes more natural, your body's awareness increases too, which makes it a lot easier. So yeah, it's about kind of, not getting overwhelmed with Pilates. I know one man I showed the reformer to, and he thought it was some crazy, S&M device from 50 Shades of Grey. I was like, no, it's a piece of equipment for Pilates.
It does look a little crazy, I guess. At first I was like walking into a class, I'm like, what are these towers? Like, I don't understand what this equipment is. So.
Oh yeah, like the Cadillac towers and stuff with, loops hanging off them, people hanging up upside down off them. When someone walks in the studio, they're like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it could definitely be intimidating, but that's some really good advice, because I think it's important to, not get too hard on yourself. You're doing this to just help your body, to help yourself heal, and to find a way to connect with your own muscles in your body and just make yourself feel better. So definitely very great advice.
Yeah. I think of exercise in general is like the best self-care tool you can do. And my kind of theory about it all is that we have enough to deal with having, health problems, bladder pain. We deal with enough stuff in our lives. Let's not add extra stress by feeling we must exercise and we should do this and, putting all the extra pressure on ourselves. But instead thinking of like, I'm doing this for my body and this is to support me and make me feel better, and using movement as like a tool in your pain toolbox of things you can try to kind of help manage things. And I know when I'm working with my clients with that, the biggest mind shift they have is kind of realizing that like movement's a positive thing and there's nothing to feel guilty about or that you're not doing enough. It's just focusing on what you can do and using it to help you. And I think once you sort of switch to that mindset, exercise becomes more enjoyable again versus just feeling like, I don't know, you're never doing enough or doing it right or doing, there's so many shoulds and shouldn'ts otherwise in exercise.
Definitely. You said it completely right there. I think it just becomes a chore for us. And when you get diagnosed with an illness or you go through surgery and you have to kind of like rehabilitate yourself, I feel like exercise starts to become a little bit more enjoyable in general, because you've taken for granted that, your body works right. You can move well. When you can't do that, just learning how to redo some of the movements, it becomes more enjoyable. And it's like you're reaching a goal and a milestone in your world of recovery. So definitely really some great tips there. And I just really appreciate you being on the show today and sharing your love for Pilates.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for asking me to be part of it. And yeah, like I said at the beginning, these are two of my favorite subjects. So I could talk about them all day.
Definitely. Very much appreciated. It's such a great topic. And I think this will really help a lot of people who haven't considered Pilates yet. So I hope everyone out there that has IC or any other related condition or an autoimmune disease, that you really think about trying Pilates. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to the Bladder Battle Podcast special series, I See in the Dark. And make sure you subscribe if you are listening on YouTube, or leave a rating or review on Spotify or Apple. And stay tuned for the next episode right here on the Bladder Battle Podcast.